How to invest in cars, aka how to not lose money when you're buying cars. When you say you're investing in cars, you're basically investing in your happiness, because the chances of a car actually going up in value like crazy, skyrocketing, making a ton of money is slim to none. The cars that tend to skyrocket tens if not hundreds of thousands of dollars tend to be cars that are already worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Over the last few years, I've bought and sold a few cars, and here's how I did it by almost losing no money. The first trick is don't buy new and don't buy slightly used. Buying a slightly used car in some circumstances, especially when you're looking to get a regular car, is probably the best way to go. Slightly used will take away from the depreciation that the first owner took, but also you don't have multiple owners in front of you that you don't really know what they did to said car. The mileage is probably fairly low. You still have newer technology and all of the things that go into that. But today, we're not really talking about regular cars. And the best way to do that is to buy a car that has already hit the bottom depreciation curve. Cars like NA Miatas and B Miatas, C5 Corvettes, things along that extent. They're already 10, 15, if not 20 plus years old. In some circumstances, unfortunately, at this point in time, those cars have been beat up, just destroyed by previous owners, and that's kind of when the hard part kicks in. I bought my C5 Z06 at the beginning of last year. I sold it at the end of last year for basically what I had into it after title, tax, registration, and doing some maintenance to it. I found a car with an original owner. It had some lower miles on it. I drove it. I enjoyed it, but I wish it had been driven a little bit more. When you're buying a car that's 20 plus years old, you want to make sure it doesn't really have low miles and it's not been sitting for multiple years, because when a car sits, things like brakes, oil, all of those things are going to need to be changed, but tires and weird stuff that's going to come up. In the C5, there's going to be a ton of weird electrical things that come up and just aren't going to work. And those things can start adding to the cost, especially when they stop working. But most likely you're not going to lose your absolute rear end on a car like that because you're not taking any depreciation hits. The car is probably going to be worth just about as much as you bought it for, unless you overpaid like crazy a couple of years later. You can drive the car around, you can put some miles on it, and then you can sell it for what you bought it for. And that's the most important part. You can trade in and out of the car for what you have into the car. The point I'm trying to get at is just buy a car at the end of its depreciation curve. There's certain newer cars that have kind of hit bottom depreciation and probably won't tank off for a couple years. Cars like Shelby GT350s, S197 GT500s, C7 Z06s. Those cars are newer, they're a little bit more expensive, but their curve is kind of flattened. You know, those cars have something special, whether it's a manual transmission, the car isn't being offered anymore, or perhaps the motor in the car is just something special. They don't make them like they used to, is the point that I'm trying to get at, and people want those cars. Now, before we get into this next point, which is arguably the most important point, did you know that most of you guys who are watching this video aren't subscribed? Go down, subscribe! That's the second point. Buy a car that is semi-desirable. Because if you're looking into getting a car that has no desirability behind it, something super niche that only a few people want, chances of that car holding its value go a little bit less. If you're buying a car for a few $1,000s, it's a little different. The car will probably always be worth a few $1,000s if it still runs in this economy. And then the third thing will be, don't modify it or excessively modify it. You know, if you're okay with spending a few $1,000s doing some wheels, coilovers, and exhaust, the basic things to make the car nice, cool, and even more fun, consider that money you're just throwing away. If you're supercharging a car, you're doing built motors, you're doing all of these things to the car, you're not going to recover your money. Ever. Because you put a ton of mods on a car, it's going to limit the pool of buyers once again, but also those mods are now used mods, and, well, people don't necessarily want to pay for what you have into them. You can go upside down in a car very quickly by modifying it excessively. I love excessively modified cars, don't get me wrong, but if you're buying and you want to own it for a little bit and you want to sell it, well, you're going to lose money. Let's just be real. Find a car at the bottom of the depreciation curve, you drive it, you enjoy it, you maintain it, and, well, you just keep it in nice condition. Chances are you're going to get the same amount of money that you bought it for a few months later or maybe a year or so later. This is a fantastic way to enjoy vehicles. Now, there is a risk involved in this, and that's the car breaking down and having issues, which is one of the reasons why I made the video and why I said, oh, I don't like Corvettes or why I wouldn't buy another one, because, well, chance of failure and expensive failure is a very valid point. It's also just a little bit of rage bait for the boomers, but that's a story for a different time. What I'm trying to say is, you gotta be careful. Some cars will have expensive repairs that go with them. BMWs, for example, if you're buying an E92 BMW M3, you want to make sure it has its throttle actuators and its rod bearings done. And if it doesn't, you probably want to take that off the sale price and get them done. Your car will be worth more after they're done, but also you don't want to pay for them and then go upside down in the car because you tried to do the regular maintenance or the common issues and things that do go wrong, which will either blow your engine up or prevent you from driving it. Just be careful and read the common issues and concerns that owners have and tend to have, and make sure those are either addressed or you address them and you keep in mind the budget and price point of the purchase. You can easily buy a BMW, Corvette, things along that extent that have some bigger repairs go with them. Not expect to have this $1,000, $2,000 repair right away and have to do it immediately. And then you go, well, I just spent, $2,500 on this car. It's not worth $2,500 more than what I bought it for. So trying to get an extra $3,000, $4,000 out of it probably isn't going to happen. And then you lose some money. But at the end of the day, you lost a couple $100, maybe a couple $1,000, and you got to own a sweet car for a couple of years. Not really the worst circumstance in the world, in my opinion. Sometimes you can get super lucky and buy a car that doesn't really have any issues, continue to not have issues, and sell it without having any issues. When you're playing around with 20-year-old, even 15, 10-year-old cars, small things are gonna come up and you gotta expect that. That's kind of like the guideline, the basis to how to not lose a ton of money on cars. When I saw people buying cars like C8 Z06s for $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 over, it was absolutely ridiculous. You know those people were going to lose their tails in a couple of years. There's certain people I heard paying $100,000 for a C8 Z06. Those cars were worth sticker like a year later. They lost $100,000 on a C8 Corvette. Not even a 01, just a Z06. So the final big part I'll leave you guys on is don't pay into the hype. Even some older cars will all of a sudden catch a hype, catch some fire. Don't play into it. Old cars can be a little tricky when they get on hype. Sometimes they'll hold on the hype, and sometimes they'll go higher than the hype, and then sometimes they'll just fall off a cliff. But new cars almost always will depreciate like crazy. If they're not that limited, if they're not that rare, a car like a Corvette, they're going to fall in value. Now the new ZR1 is coming out. We're probably going to see something similar with that car. They're going to sell hundreds of thousands of dollars over sticker, and then they're probably going to be worth a little bit over sticker in the not too distant future. Now it might take a little bit for it to happen. I don't know how limited those cars are going to be, but like the Z06, it wasn't a limited car and people were going crazy over them for no reason. Even the base C8 when it first came out, people were going insane over them. With all of that said, if you guys did enjoy this video, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one.